So we had some news drop just ahead of the weekend that did get people pretty excited based on the headlines because it appeared that Apple was going to allow emulators for something like a Game Boy Advance just on their App Store for iOS, so on your iPhone or your iPad. And that is completely different than how they've sort of treated those types of applications based its entire way, and that's one of the reasons that so many people would work to jailbreak their Apple devices so they could sideload things like different emulators for their retro systems. Well, with those headlines going around and a lot of excitement, many people started to actually look in to some of the language that was added to the guidelines from Apple, and unfortunately, to me anyway, this doesn't really look like a big win for emulation. This kind of looks like Apple being Apple and trying to pull a fast one here, and we're going to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So first, let's take a look. This is posted up over on their guidelines page. It's a lengthy page that they have here, all kinds of terms and services and rules basically for their App Store on iOS. And the one that people noticed was added was 4.7 right here. Mini apps, mini games, streaming games, chatbots, plugins, and game emulators. So they do specifically point out game emulators. They say apps may offer certain software that is not embedded in the binary, specifically HTML5, mini apps and mini games, streaming games, chatbots, and plugins. Additionally, retro game console emulator apps can offer to download games. You are responsible for all such software offered in your app, including ensuring that such software complies with these guidelines and applicable laws. So the idea here is, yes, you can technically submit an application that would be an emulator for, we'll say a GameCube, so the Dolphin emulator, just as an example. You could have that dropped right in there, and it'll be approved, and you're off and running. The issue right now, and the thing that people are unsure of really, is how exactly does that work to load a ROM file? So this was outlined by PPSSPP, the PlayStation Portable emulator, and they say this seems to imply that retro game console emulators like PSP is almost 20 years old, that has to count as retro, will be allowed in the iOS App Store. However, it's also mentioned later that links must be provided to all downloadable software, which makes it unclear if emulators will be allowed to let the user pick from their own files and not just app internal downloads. And they don't own, as they mentioned, the rights to PlayStation Portable games. Technically, you could have homebrew games, I guess, that are or abandonware or freeware, that sort of thing. But they can't go out there and say, oh, you can download God of War Ghost of Sparta just in the emulator. We'll get you the link. You don't have to leave the emulator, just downloads, and you're good to go. Because obviously the emulator, as we've gone over multiple times in its state, is legal, but everything that technically it would work to play is like 99% copywritten, so the different games, right? The idea of the emulator being legal is that it's separated from all of those files. Now you hear this from Apple with their own verbiage that you would essentially have to provide download links in that application to the different files, and it's like, well, hold on, we can't actually do that because that would inherently then make that application illegal. And I mean, Apple says here it has to comply with like piracy, DMC, all the different copyright acts, and if it doesn't, well, it'll just be ejected from the App Store. So basically, if it was going to be an emulator that would have any kind of function, it would then be illegal because you'd go to download the ROMs in that application. So what I'm gathering here from Apple is that they are kind of pulling a fast one with the verbiage and them being quote unquote more open because of a lot of the regulatory scrutiny they've been under and that is coming up. So in the EU, they've been, I mean, at odds constantly with regulators, and that, to my understanding, is one of the reasons we have USB-C ports now on the iPhone, which is a welcome change from that Lightning. It was just annoying. If you had someone in the house that had an iPhone, you always had this one adapter that nothing else used but that iPhone, and it's just frustrating because everything else uses USB-C now, basically. But they, of course, have gone to that, and we're seeing that they're also opening up the idea of side-loading additional programs or even storefronts in the EU. The problem is Apple has then attached a bunch of other things to it that makes it so it's not even worth going that route. Like, there's different fees and other hoops to jump through. Microsoft and Epic Games have both expressed frustration with that entire situation. And to me, this is another situation where Apple is currently under scrutiny by the Department of Justice in the US with a new lawsuit that is all about their closed off ecosystem, green and blue bubbles. They've brought up game streaming as well as a thing here. And this is a way, I assume, for Apple to be like, oh, no, our storefront is very open. We're even allowing emulators and game streaming apps and HTML5, that sort of thing, right? But they don't really have much functionality unless technically you're the owner of those works. So the thing that I think would be kind of interesting for this is you could have Sega, Nintendo, really anyone, any of these companies that have a collection of games that would run on a PS1 emulator, as an example. Like Square, they could technically do that. They could have an entire library of games that's all available in one application, and when you buy a game in that application, it then goes and retrieves the files and downloads them. So they could release I don't know, an entire Final Fantasy collection app or something, like World of Final Fantasy, that kind of thing. And it's like you go in there and you buy the different games and you can just play them that way. Or you can kind of think of other ones. Sega, I know they try to do Sega Forever, I think, at one point, and that was kind of weird, but the idea is there. If you own the works for it, you can technically use an emulator, and you don't have to go through then the App Store for each individual thing. You can sort of process the payments and stuff, I guess, yourself through that app. Again, the verbiage and stuff still kind of vague, and it seems like some people are going to either have to step over the line and find out from Apple what's right and what's wrong, or they're going to have to get a bit more detailed and update this further, potentially as the lawsuit with the DOJ continues. The other aspect is if we get to a position where Apple just has to open up iOS, so you could have Google Play Store downloaded and just on the front screen for your iPhone when you turn it on, you can download whatever you want there, then none of this would really matter anyway, because all these emulators exist on Android. And it's still funny to me to think that you hear obviously about the iPhone and people really like that ecosystem stuff, but when I see this, I'm reminded of actually how closed off that device seems to be to some of these different applications and things that we've been doing on Android for so long now. So that I wouldn't mind seeing Apple have to let something like Google Play, just that can be on there. Xbox can have their own app. Epic can do their own thing. I just think at this point that might just be better for a lot of iPhone users. Although I guess Apple's argument right now is that their closed off ecosystem keeps people safe within the iPhone community. I don't know if that's a great argument necessarily for having something this closed off to where even emulators are questionable as if they can even be allowed there. The thing that I would like to see if they do open this up completely is further development for these M series chips in iPhones, iPads. It's really, really cool to have these with MacBooks, MacBook Pros, iMacs. They do see some development from these emulators, but it's so clear that without the iPhone, the audience, while it's still there, it's not as exponentially large as it could be, and it does make more sense to develop for the masses that are on ARM with these different phones on Android, or even just on PC, that sort of thing. So that's something that I think would be really cool if they open it up to where emulators could really take advantage of these M series chips at a more, I guess, a more focused level of development. But that, again, this isn't anything I would put a lot of stock into for Apple, because this seems like something thrown in that they can use essentially in arguments with their lawsuit right now, or antitrust lawsuit with the DOJ. But hey, let me know what you guys think about this one down below. If you're maybe an Apple user who got really excited when you read the headlines, but then you looked into the fine print and went, okay, it's Apple being Apple. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.